glasses on.
Doesn't matter. Whatever he wants. Good morning, everyone. Today is 12 January, the year 2005. I'm Dr. Dave Thompson, a volunteer at the Palm Springs Air Museum here in California. Part of our mission is to record and preserve the history of our country's military conflicts. As part of the Veterans History Project of the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., we conduct interviews of veterans and civilians who participated in these conflicts. Today, I'm here at the museum along with special guests Debbie Bike and Beverly Schmidt. And today we have the honor and the privilege of interviewing Lieutenant Harry Schmidt. Lieutenant Schmidt was a forward air controller in Korea and subsequently a test pilot for Pratt & Whitney at Edwards Air Force Base. So we're going to talk to him about that and a lot of other things. Nice to have you here, Harry.
Pleasure.
Okay. Now, first of all, would you repeat and spell your full name for us, please?
Harry Schmidt, S-C-H-M-I-D-T.
And when and where were you born?
June 1st, 1928 in Brooklyn, New York.
Brooklyn, New York, huh? Trolley Dodger?
Well, I only lived there for 5 years,
Okay.
and then we moved to Yonkers, New York.
Okay.
So we never got involved in either Brooklyn or the baseball teams.
Ebbets Field and stuff. What was your father's name?
My father's name was Henry, but my mother didn't know that his name was Henry, and she called me Harry Jr. In fact, that almost disqualified me from becoming a member of the USAF. They couldn't understand how a Harry Jr. had a father by the name of Henry.
And where did your dad's family come from, your ancestors on that side of the family?
I don't know very much about my father, my father's ancestors. He was born in Brooklyn, and my mother was born in Brooklyn, but his part of the family came from Germany. They both died when he was very young, and I never knew anything about his parents.
Okay. And your mom, what was her maiden name and her full name?
Marie Schindel, S-C-H-I-N-D-L. She was born in, I think, Brooklyn too, and her family was from Austria.
Okay. And what did your dad do?
He ran a maritime transportation company in New York City. That they owned the largest fleet of barges, flat-decked scows, to transport sand and material and bricks. In fact, most of the sand that was used to build the buildings in New York City were transported on scows or barges owned by his company.
Oh.
And they had a brick plant up on the Hudson River, and we transported sand up to the brick plant and then brick down to New York City.
And what was the name of the company? What's his own?
The Rice, R-I-C-E. I don't know, Rice Transportation, something like that.
Yeah. But when you were 5, you moved to Yonkers, did you
Yes,
say?
yeah.
And why did you move there?
They had the Rice Company had a real estate development, a very upscale real estate development of, 500, 600, 700 acres in Yonkers, and they were building luxurious homes, which in those days were very luxurious, and which today are still considered upscale for that part of the town.
And so he worked on the homes and things, your dad?
Yeah, he as a weekend activity, he worked during the week down in New York City,
Oh.
and then on the weekends,
Well, how far is Yonkers from New York City?
40-minute train ride. So during the weekdays, he ran the transportation company, and on the weekends he ran the sales office for the real estate development company.
Do you have any brothers and sisters?
Sister,
What was her name?
Frances,
Is she still living?
yes.
Uh,
Married a very important guy, by the way. Married she went to work for IBM as a secretary, and she married a boss who had just come out of MIT at the end of World War II. And he had been the project manager on the radar bomb site, and became really kind of well known for his pioneering work on the radar bomb site.
Was that the Norden bomb site?
No,
We're talking about. Oh.
no. The Norden bomb site was a visual bomb site. The radar bomb site was not a visual bomb site. But then he went to IBM and was given a project by IBM, and the project was to design and build IBM's first computer. And he eventually became the #1 technical guy at IBM, leading vice president of research and development for IBM in the quest to become the #1 computer company in the world.
Now, was that the very first computer that was ever built, the IBM one?
That was the first computer that IBM built.
But there was computers before that?
Yeah, there had been and I forget, one of the well-known names, Remington or somebody,
Yeah.
had built a computer before that.
I know we have these old Life magazines from like back in the 40s, and then there's one that has a computer that's like it's bigger than this room, it seemed like, and it was, I don't know, it was the very first one, but it was like...
Indeed, we went to the inauguration of that IBM computer. They called it the NORC, the Naval Ordnance Research Computer, supposedly the so-called atom bomb computer. But it was in a gigantic room, 100 feet by 100 feet, with nothing but vacuum tubes.
Yeah.
And red and green lights. The green lights indicated that the system or a component of the computer was working correctly, and a red light meant that that part of the computer was not working correctly. And for the unveiling on that day, they had taken out all the red lights.
that was really something. So what year was that when you moved to Yonkers then?
33?
33, okay. Kind of tail end of the Depression. Did your family, were they affected by it any? Your dad, was he able to work all during the Depression and stuff?
I think everybody was affected. He had a job during the entire time, and we had an income during the entire time.
Do you remember where you lived in Yonkers? Remember the house that you grew up in?
Sure do.
Where was that?
Warburton Avenue on the Hudson River.
Oh.
Up in the very north end of Yonkers. The Hudson River is absolutely a beautiful river, and we had a great view of the Hudson River and what they call the Palisades, the stone cliffs lining the west side of the river. Back in those days, North Yonkers was a lovely place to be living.
Did you fish in the river any?
And didn't swim in the river, and wouldn't eat anything from the river.
But it was a beautiful river.
It was it was a sewer pipe back in those days. Yeah.
Is it cleaner now?
Oh yeah. They spent a lot of money and done a very good job of cleaning up the river. You can swim in it today, and I guess people eat out of it today.
So when you were kids growing up, what did you like to do? What did you do for fun?
We belonged to a boat club on the Hudson River, and I'll bring aviation into the subject right away.
Okay.
And they had a little plot of land on the north side of the boat club that they rented to a young fellow by the name of Paul Lonquish, who had some financial backers in Yonkers, and they bought initially one and then two of the old Piper Cubs on floats.
Oh, yeah.
And every spare moment I would spend at the boat club, or really at that little marine flying base, doing anything Paul wanted me to do. cleaning windshields, pumping gas, spinning props, etc. And he would, my pay was occasionally at the end of the week, if he didn't have anybody to fly, he'd give me a 5 or 10 minute flying lesson.
Oh, I bet that was exciting, yeah. So how old were you when you first went up then?
Probably 10 years old. And then World War II came, and all aviation facilities within 50 miles of New York had to be shut down. And obviously Yonkers was within 50 miles. So Paul Onquish had gone off and flew C-46s over the hump during the war. And the aircraft was acquired by a fellow by the name of Rennie Koch. And he moved the aircraft and put it on wheels and moved it up to Stormville Airport, which was, I don't know, 75 miles north of New York City. And in fact, I soloed on that aircraft on my 16th birthday. Not old enough to drive an aircraft, drive a car, but old enough to fly an airplane.
Oh my gosh, that's great. Do you remember what you were doing December 7th, 1941?
It was a Sunday. We were just home, doing whatever families did in the wintertime in New York City, which wasn't very much.
Yeah. And did it make a big impact on you, or were you old enough to understand what that all meant?
Oh yeah. I was in high school at the time, and obviously it had a big impact. Almost immediately, all the young men were drafted and went into the Army, or Navy, or Army Air Corps. And there'd be big parades down in the middle of Yonkers on the days that a large number of people were being inducted into the Army, and we would occasionally go to those. Cause of some celebration, as a matter of fact.
So what high school did you go to?
I went to Gorton High School for 2 years, but then when the war was continuing, we thought it would be a good idea to prepare for West Point. So I went to a private high school in New York City called the Dwight School, right on Park Avenue, just 3 or 4 blocks south of Grand Central, and spent a year and a half at Dwight School, and preparing for West Point, and took the competitive exam for West Point on the day that the B-25 crashed into the Empire State Building.
Really? Oh, yeah.
On a Saturday. And my father had gone into town, into work that Saturday, and he was one of the few eyewitnesses of the B-25 crashing into the Empire State Building.
Yeah, one of our Life magazines has that picture of
Yeah.
it. Yeah. Oh. How close was he to the away? How far away was he when it happened?
What, the Empire State Building is on like 34th Street, and his office was on Park Avenue at 40th Street. So that was only, 6 blocks away.
Wow. Yeah.
In fact, the aircraft, as he tells the story, had flown pretty much right over his office building. And then there was a cloud apparently between, it was a cloudy day and a lot of low-hanging clouds.
Mm-hmm.
And he could see that the airplane was headed toward the cloud, but that just beyond the cloud was the Empire State Building. So he saw the aircraft disappear into the cloud, and then he saw it come out of the cloud, and as soon as it came out of the cloud, the pilot saw a lot of a building right in front of him, and put the plane into a severe turn either to the left or to the right. but couldn't avoid the building and crashed into the building.
So did you end up going to West Point then?
No, I graduated in January. I got an appointment to West Point. I got the highest score from that congressional district. I got an appointment to West Point, but then decided to go to college because West Point only started in September, and this was January
Of what year?
of '46. So I went to college, figuring that that was going to be a worthwhile introduction to higher learning at West Point. But then the end of the war came in the summer of '46, and I just stayed in college and did not go to West Point.
And what college was that?
RPI, Rensselaer Polytechnic.
In what town is that? Where is that?
Troy, New York, right alongside Albany, New York.
Okay. And what was your major?
Engineering.
Had you had a girlfriend by then?
Do I have to answer that question?
You can answer.
Not really, no.
Oh, okay. Not engaged or married or anything by this time?
No.
Okay. Now, how did you end up in Korea? Let's follow on with your college career. Talk about that a little bit.
No, just spent 4 years at RPI, graduated in January of 1950 with a BME, mechanical engineering degree. Worked for Otis Elevator Company for a couple of months as a junior engineer. And then June 22nd or 23rd or something, came and the Korean War started. And I volunteered for pilot training the very next day.
Mm-hmm. And where did you take your basic training?
Basic training was at Goodfellow Air Force Base in San Angelo, Texas, in T-6s, and then went to advanced training at Advance Air Force Base in Oklahoma, Enid, Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
I'd done very well in basic training, graduated at the top of the class in basic training, and they offered a bunch of us a unique opportunity, and that was to rather than to continue with advanced training that led to either P-51s, which was the fighter part of the Air Force in those days, or B-25s that led to the bombers. They offered a few of us the opportunity to continue in T-6s and go right into jet transition, and I volunteered for that, and graduated after having flown nothing except T-6s, and then went to Moody Air Force Base in Valdosta, Georgia, and they gave us one flight in the back of a T-33 and one flight in the front of a T-33, and proclaimed us to be jet pilots. It was an exciting experience.
I bet. And was there a big difference between the props and the jets as far as you could determine when you were?
I don't remember exactly, but a T-6 had a cruise speed of 140 miles an hour, and we never got over like 7,000 or 8,000 feet. And the jet would go up to 40,000 feet and cruised at 600 miles an hour. So was there a difference in that?
How about handling differences?
Oh yeah. Everything about the jet was a radical departure from the T-6s. But what made it difficult and I should add deadly was the fact that the instructors we had in jet transition were not very capable jet pilots, and we, in my view, we were really not given very good instruction. For example, the pilot that instructed me at Moody said that the way you made a landing was to and Moody was in the middle of the Okefenokee swamp, and there were nothing but swamp trees around the end of the runways, but they had leveled off, I don't know, 300-400 yards, 1,000 feet from the end of the runway to the trees. So the instructor said, now the way you make a landing here is you come over the end of the trees at, I don't remember, 130 miles an hour, let's say, and you pull off all of your power, and then you dip down to like 3 feet above the swamp grass, which is the overrun. And then by the time you have gotten up to the runway, you have bled off the last 20 miles of airspeed, and you touch down right at the end of the runway. And he demonstrated that to me, and he said, now that's what I want you to do. So on the next flight, I was in the front seat, and I did it that way, and it worked out just great. And then the third flight was in an F-80, and I did the same thing. But then we knew that night flying was coming up, and I thought, you know, I'm not sure I like that idea of trying to come over the trees at 50 feet over the trees, because number one, I'm not going to be able to see the trees, and number two, there are no landing lights out there in the overrun. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to see that I'm 5 feet above the swamp grass out at the end of the runway. And I think that I've got to invent another way to make this approach. And that was an example of what I thought was guys really not knowing how the better techniques of how to fly an aircraft.
So,
and we were caught up in that.
So what adjustment did you make then?
Well, I developed for my own use, what is now the routine standard, a stabilized approach, used roughly the same airspeed, but came in aiming at the end of the runway, with power up until you are approaching the end of the runway, and then pulled off the power at approaching the end of the runway, and then landed.
Were there some pilots that were not able to make the transition to jets, or could most anybody that could fly a prop make that transition?
We had quite a few guys wash out of jet transition and just left the program. We had several others who died, who washed out in a different kind of a way. But the reason the Air Force told us that they were trying to have this experimental program was that they said that they had been trying for the last several months to take World War II pilots who had been flying, I assume, P-51s and P-47s in World War II, and were trying to transition them into jets, and were not having much success. And they wanted to see if they could be successful in transitioning people right out of training school.
Not set in their ways so much.
Yeah. Presumably without any of the bad habits that they may have learned from flying P-51s. Now, whether or not that was right, I don't know. And I've got no data to support any affirmation one way or another that they either had or had not trouble. Yeah, I know we lost quite a few guys in jet training, but other than that, I've got no data.
So you were happy to be in jets then?
Oh yeah. young guy. Well, on your first on the first takeoff, I was in the back seat of the T-33. The pilot took off, and he leveled off at about 50 feet over the Okefenokee Swamp, and accelerated up to, I don't know, 550 miles an hour or something like that. And I just couldn't imagine going that fast and being that low to the ground. You really get a feeling of speed. And we got up to 550 miles an hour, and he pulled it straight up and into an Immelman, and we leveled off at, I don't know, 30,000 feet. And from takeoff to up to 30,000 feet may have taken, 3 minutes or something like that. And that was the most exciting 3 minutes of any young guy's life.
Jet fuel, does it differ much from aviation gasoline?
Oh yeah, it's kerosene.
Oh, kerosene, okay. So, where did you go from there then, from that base?
I went to Tyndall Air Force Base down in on the western coast of Florida, just east of Pensacola. The name will come to me in a second, but it isn't important. But in any event, that was F-94 transition. So we went into F-94s from the
F-94,
F-80s.
F-80s I'm familiar with those. I'm not familiar with an F-94. How did that differ from an F-80?
Well, the F-80 was a single-seat fighter. The T-33 was the two-seat trainer aircraft that was really very close to the F-80. And then they had 3 models of the F-94. They had put in a bigger engine. They had retained the 2-crew configuration, the pilot in the front and a radar observer in the back. And they had a radar scope in the back seat and a radar set in the very front of the aircraft. And we had I forget, 4 or 6 50 caliber machine guns up in the nose. That was our armament. So we were the all-weather fighter. We would fly at night and in bad weather to find enemy bombers or enemy fighters.
Did they have any of these in Korea?
Yes, they did.
Did they?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then they had the and that was the A and B. And then they had the F-94C, which was it really should have been a different designation, because a totally new aircraft, a bigger airframe, a new radar system, a brand new, much more powerful engine, much thinner wings, and rockets instead of machine guns for armament. But I didn't fly the F-94C until I got back to the States after being overseas for a while.
So did you go overseas from Florida, from that base?
I volunteered for Korea, got to Hawaii on orders to take me to the F-94 outfit in Korea. But then one of our guys got sick, and they decided to keep us together while he recuperated. And in that week, they changed our orders from going to Korea to going to Okinawa. So I ended up on Okinawa, in the 4th Fighter Interceptor Squadron on Okinawa. Okinawa at that time being the major Air Force installation in the Pacific. The B-29s that were bombing Korea every night were based here in Okinawa.
And how long were you there?
Altogether, a little bit under 2 years. In the introduction, you said that I was a forward air controller, which indeed I had written on that piece of paper. but I kept on kind of needling the CO that I had really wanted to go to Korea, not Okinawa. And finally one day he said, it was in the wintertime, he said, hey, you've been talking to me about going to Korea all the time. You still want to go? I said, yeah. He said, well, there's a DC-3 down there on the ramp right now. It's leaving in 15 minutes. If you can pack your bag and be on that DC-3 in 15 minutes, you can go to Korea. So I packed my bag, got up to Korea, and found out that I was not in an F-94 squadron, but in a forward air controller squadron. If I had known that, I might not have volunteered for Korea.
Describe forward air controller squadron.
We were flying, and I really don't know the kind of aircraft, either a small Piper Cub or a small Stinson or something.
Right.
Two-seat aircraft, fabric wings, no armament whatsoever. And we were assigned to an Army, and I don't know Army designations, an Army battalion that was right up at the front lines. I could walk from the tent that they put me in to the front lines. It was, I don't know, 300 yards away. And we operated off a road, a supply road that came up from the south. When we were getting ready to either land or take off, they put an MP at each end of the road and close off the road, and I'd land or take off on that road. And then we'd fly out over North Korea and look for things. Never saw very much. Virtually impossible. If you saw anything of any significant size, it was the good guys, not the bad guys. So you were looking for not much more than individual soldiers, maybe on bicycles or things like that. It was not a
Take any enemy fire when you were flying
a little
this?
bit, not very much.
Now, who controlled the skies then, pretty much?
Oh, USAF the USAF controlled the skies, at least at the lower altitudes. We were directing F-80s and P-51s and occasionally a Sky Raider or something like that to make bomb drops on targets that either we saw or we thought we saw. And it was not my perception that the North Koreans really interfered with the use of lower airspace. No, I wasn't involved in any high altitude operations. So F-86s were up battling the MiGs up at high altitudes.
Okay.
But we were not at high altitude. We were at 100 feet or 150 feet.
Right. So how long were you in Korea doing that then?
Only 3 or 4 months. And then I went back to Okinawa, which was plenty long for me. And Korea, I can attest, is very cold in the wintertime.
We all think of Korea when we see MASH.
Yeah, yeah.
Must have been similar to that, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly like that.
So, did you stay in the service then when Korea was over, or what?
No, I had a 4-year obligation, and I got out 4 years after I went in. And I had an opportunity to get out after 4 years, and did get out after 4 years.
And what'd you do then?
I was being discharged on like a Monday or a Tuesday, and I bought the New York. I was stationed at Otis Air Force Base in a squadron whose CEO was Chappie James,
Oh yeah.
and Chappie James was the
Tuskegee Airmen.
yeah, I think the first black Air Force general.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd been in his squadron for a year and a half after I came back from Korea. And but in any event, yeah, I bought the New York Times, and the largest single advertisement in the Help Wanted section was an ad by Pratt & Whitney Aircraft for an engineering test pilot to fly Pratt & Whitney aircraft, and that was in Hartford, and my parents lived in Yonkers, and I was on Cape Cod, so I had to drive through Hartford on my way back to Yonkers, yes.
Mm-hmm.
So that either the next day or the day after, I checked out of the squadron early in the morning, and at lunch was having, at noontime was having lunch in East Hartford, and called the phone number on that ad, and that afternoon I had an interview with the chief test pilot for Pratt & Whitney Aircraft, and I'm not sure, a month later, a month and a half later, they offered me the job, and I went to work for Pratt & Whitney.
Now they made aircraft engines.
Yes, I did.
Is that correct? Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So you basically would be testing the engines in aircraft, flying aircraft with their engines was the idea.
Yeah, historically, well, Pratt had always made engines. They made nothing but engines. And in the past, Pratt had tested all of the engines in what they call testbed aircraft. They had a B-17, they had two B-45s, they later got a C-124, etc. And they would, on the B-17, they cut off the nose and put a turboprop engine in the nose. In the B-45s, they reconfigured the bomb bays and dropped a J-57 out of the bomb bay of one B-45 and a J-75 out of the bomb bay of the other B-45, and tested the engines in aircraft with known and reliable engines. Namely, the B-45 had, I hate to say, GE engines, and the B-17 had Wright engines, but there wasn't any question about the ability to fly the aircraft back if the experimental engine gave you trouble. But then came the application of the J-57 and J-75. The first application of the J-57 was in the F-100, which became the beginning of what was later called the Century series of fighters.
And those are jet engines, right?
These were jet engines in jet aircraft, and they were the first aircraft capable of supersonic flight. And the F-100 was indeed the first aircraft capable of supersonic flight, level flight, not in a dive. So, some other aircraft had been capable of going supersonic and straight down.
Now, was the P-80, was that the first basic jet fighter that the Army had?
No, it was Bell, I think, that made the P-59.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
And that was the first American jet fighter.
Right.
But the P-59 turned out to be an unstable airframe platform. So they at the last minute gave Lockheed a contract to build the F-80, which was really called PAD, back in the days when they called fighters pursuit aircraft
Right.
rather than
I know.
fighter aircraft.
Uh-huh.
But anyway, getting back to the F-100, the F-100 had a lot of problems. It had aerodynamic problems, stability and control problems, and the engine was not operating. The Pratt & Whitney J57 engine was not operating well in the F-100. A lot of what they call compressor stalls.
So
And-
would you say that certain engines work better in certain types of airframes as opposed to others, or I mean, if you had a good engine, it could, and you had a good airframe, it didn't matter, or were they kind of configured for each other more or less?
No, the problem with the F-100, well, the problem with all jet engines was that you had to get air into the engine from the front of the aircraft someplace, and either you brought it in through the front of the aircraft, but if you brought it in through the front of the aircraft, and the engine was behind the pilot, you had to somehow squunch the air down low to get it under and around the cockpit, and then back up and into the engine. Or if you wanted to bring the air in from the side, you brought air in through two side intakes, and then you had to have essentially a right angle turn to direct the flow in toward the center, and then another right angle turn to direct it into the engine. So it was, the engines worked fine if the engines were in a free stream. We never had any compressor stall problems with the J57 when they were in the bomb bays of the B-45s, because here you just got air coming straight in to the engine. You have a question?
No, I'm okay. Yeah, I was a little, when you were talking about that, you say dropped into the bomb bays or something. How did that work? A B-45 is a bomber, right? You're
Yeah.
talking about, and so it still had props on it, but the jet engines were kind of added on to it. Was that the idea, or what?
No, the B-45 was a four-engine jet bomber. In fact, the first, I think it was the first jet bomber.
Okay, so it was all jet, well, no
It
props.
was all jets.
Okay.
And it had a great big bomb bay. And Pratt & Whitney took out all of the bomb hanging equipment from the inside of the bomb bay and enlarged the bomb bay doors so that the jet engine could be sucked up into the bomb bay itself and not out in the airstream. And of course we had to get it up from below the aircraft, because otherwise you couldn't land the aircraft. The jet engine was down there.
Okay, all right, I see what you mean. So, but it had other engines in the wings.
In the wings, yes.
Okay, but when you got it up, then that added more power or more speed to it when you.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, and then you retracted it up into when you landed. Okay,
Yeah,
I got
yeah.
you.
But the Air Force was having, not only the Air Force, but North American, which made the F-100, was having great trouble with keeping the engines going because of primarily compressor stall problems. And they demanded that both, and I'm not sure the word demanded is right, but the Air Force and North America, the manufacturer of the aircraft, strongly urged Pratt & Whitney to take over the testing of the engine in the F-100 aircraft and solve the compressor stall problem. So Pratt & Whitney was given, they call it a bailed aircraft. It was just administratively transferred to the control of Pratt & Whitney aircraft, and Pratt started a small flight test operation out at Edwards to fly the F-100 out there at Edwards. And I went out to be the pilot to fly the aircraft.
And what year was that?
very early in 1955.
What was that like?
Exciting, challenging. I thought a rather novice Air Force pilot with only, 3.5 years of flight operations experience in the Air Force. And I really had never seriously considered the fact that Pratt would offer me this job. And once I got it, I didn't know whether or not I wanted it on the one hand or could do it on the other hand. So I was young and nervous, but that it's the greatest challenge in the world to be able to fly an aircraft like that under conditions such as that. So I was really pretty pumped up to do it.
The weather here on the, especially that's kind of out in the desert, did that require different thoughts about flying? I mean, as far as the air being real thin, I suppose, or hotter or anything, has that changed the dynamics of the...
No, I don't recall weather really being an issue. It was, 90% of the time beautiful blue sky and unlimited visibility. No smog up in the desert back in those days. Out of fear that you might not ask me an important question, I'm going to answer the question before you answer it. Go ahead, before you ask it. The F-100 had something that was referred to as the JC maneuver. And the JC maneuver was so named on the first takeoff of the F-100 a year or so before I began flying it. North American's chief test pilot, who I assume was George Welch, took the aircraft off, and as soon as he got off the ground, it went into what I would call a porpoising flight regime. In other words, it would go up and then down and up and down and up and down. And the ups and the downs were in increasing amplitude. And everybody thought that on the last down he was going to crash. But fortunately, he survived that last down and was able to get up again and not not crash, and he landed safely. But somewhere during this porpoising action, somebody yelled out over the radio, "Jesus Christ, what's that?" So that was the origin of the famous JC maneuver.
JC. That is funny.
And indeed, it was something that you couldn't prepare for. It was my view, and I think it was probably later confirmed, that what it was a delay in the control system. Now, a pilot reacts as a driver of a car reacts. You know that if you turn your wheel, you expect the car to turn to the right. Now, what happens if the car doesn't turn to the right when you turn your wheel? You see a curve coming up, so you turn the wheel a little bit more. And what happens if the car still doesn't turn to the right? You turn your wheel really kind of violently. And all of this taking place within maybe a second of time. But about the time that you have put in your third and rather violent correction, the first input takes effect. And and that doesn't bother you so much, but only a millisecond after the first impulse takes effect, the second impulse takes effect. And only a millisecond after that, the third impulse takes effect. And that's exactly what was happening with the F-100. You put in some back pressure to go up, and the plane wouldn't go up. You put in a little bit more to go up, and it wouldn't go up. And now you're running out of runway, so now you really pull the stick back. And all of a sudden, you've got a lot greater going up than you wanted.
It's like overcorrection, I guess, in a certain way. Was that unique with the F-100, or did
Yeah.
that occur? Okay.
Yeah. And it was only on the very early F-100As. There was virtually no way, you know, back in those days there were no simulators, so that a pilot wasn't able to confront this problem before you actually were flying the aircraft. And there were a lot of guys who never survived their first takeoff of the F-100.
What was the name for the F-100? They had
The Super Sabre,
Super Sabre, yeah. They had Sabre jets in Korea. Those were
the F-86s.
F-86.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So the first takeoff on the F-100 was a supremely challenging affair. If you
So you experienced that yourself?
Oh yeah. And the first landing was also a very challenging affair. That early F-100 did not have flaps. So you, number one, had a very, very high nose-high attitude, and sufficiently nose-high that you really couldn't see the runway below you. And number two, your approach speeds were very fast. We were touching down at like 180 knots, which meant that your approach was further out at 220 knots or something like that. And that was just, you know, far beyond what we had ever been experiencing before. And with a very high nose-high attitude, you had also the chance of dragging your tailpipe. So, but if you were too fast, you'd either burst your tires or run out of runway.
That's what I was worrying about, blowing out tires coming in like that.
So it was a tricky proposition to make that first landing.
Why do you think the plane had that delayed reaction? Did no one ever figure it out?
No idea.
Was it ever corrected?
Oh yeah. They had the 100, I'm not sure if there was a 100B model, but we later got a 100C model, and that was a fine aircraft, no problems whatsoever. But that original 100A had a lot of problems.
How long did you have to fly the first model that had the problems?
Well, we had that, well, for the time that I was there at Pratt Whitney, I was flying that 100A model, as well as flying a 100C, which we got 6 or 8 months later, as well as flying an F-101. So I was flying that 100A model almost all the time that I was with Pratt Whitney.
And how many of you test pilots were there at that time?
Pratt Whitney test pilots? Uno. Me.
Just you?
Yeah.
Well, when you said we were flying it, I assumed you meant there were others.
No, what I meant, when I said we, I was referring to the Pratt Whitney flight test group
Okay.
as the we.
Yeah. So how long were you with Pratt and Whitney then?
Only about 2 years. I had decided that, quite frankly, I loved the job. I thought it was the greatest job in the world. I was, 26, 27 years old. And flying those aircraft under that condition for a 27-year-old guy, you know, has to be the greatest experience in the world. But number one, my family was not military oriented. Number two, my mother was terrified of me dying out there on the desert. And indeed, there were a lot of accidents. Back in those days, in fact, that book that I gave you has a summary of, I don't know, 100 and some odd guys who died in a relatively short period of time back there in the 1950s. Half of them being civilians.
Since you mentioned that, why don't you grab hold of that for a second and just tell us a little bit about that book, if you would, please. Mhm. Okay. Yeah.
Well, I'd given a speech at the Wings Club of New York in maybe like 1990 about my experiences test flying, and the Wings Club thought it was a good speech, and every year the Wings Club honored one or a small group of guys for their accomplishments in the field of aviation. And after the year after I gave the speech, they thought, hey, maybe test pilots are a group of guys they ought to honor. So indeed they did honor 6 or 8 test pilots, Tex Johnson of Boeing, Tony LeVere of Lockheed, Scott Crossfield of NASA, and 1 or 2 others, an English test pilot from one of the English manufacturers, and myself. And I happened to be sitting alongside Tony LeVere, and at that dinner party. And I said to Tony that, you know, nobody has really ever written a story about those days back at Edwards in the 1950s, which I thought was an important era in aviation. And in fact, the more I look back on that era, I think it was an extremely important era in aviation. You know, the first supersonic aircraft, that's a big deal. So I said to Tony, would you work with me toward writing a book about your experiences at Edwards? And he said, sure. So then, through the Society of Experimental Test Pilots that I'm a member of, I got fellows from North American and Convair and the other airframe manufacturers, and there were 6 of us all together, including Tony, and we each wrote chapters of our experiences, and the way that was done was I sent each one of them an audio tape, and over the course of several weeks, they spoke into the cassette recorder their experiences, and then at night I would type it up and send it back to them for correction, and they would correct it, and I would recorrect it and send it back to them. So eventually we got the book out. But I had added 2 other chapters, one on engine development and one on kind of overall airframe development. So we have 6 chapters from each of the 6 of us, plus 2 other chapters from that largely I wrote from my knowledge of engine development and airframe development.
And when was it published?
The date's in there, 93 or 94. I published it myself. I'd written to a couple book manufacturers, and when I saw the contracts that they were they were asking me to sign, where I gave them exclusive right to do anything. I decided I didn't want to give them exclusive right to do anything they wanted to.
Yeah.
So I decided I'd print it myself,
Okay.
where it was under my control.
I got to change tape right now. Whitney, well, you were saying that your family, by family, you're talking about you didn't have your own family by this time?
No, I was unmarried.
Okay.
And even though I loved the job, I figured that this was not a job that I wanted to continue for, for my working life, and that there were other things in life other than just having the greatest time flying the world's greatest aircraft. And quite frankly, I thought I'd like to get married and start a family.
Did you have anybody in mind you might want to get married to?
Yeah? Christy Brinkley and a couple others. But I did not want to subject them to the uncertainty of living up there at Edwards. So I just plain old quit my job. The flight test manager was absolutely dismayed that I would do that, and in fact he took the next day off. I assume he was talking with Hartford headquarters, and he came in the following day and he said the president of Pratt Whitney, who was Bill Gwynn at the time, had said that he would offer me any job I wanted at Pratt Whitney if I would just stay at Edwards for another 2 or 3 years. But I did not. I quit my job, and even though I didn't meet Christy Brinkley or marry her, I've recognized that she is either number 1 or number 2, depending upon the seriousness of the Christy possibility.
So when did you get married?
58,
1950.
I think.
Can we have Exhibit A go over there?
Oh, shit. I'm not Christy, though.
So who is this young lady here?
My first wife.
Oh, your first wife. Uh-huh. And where did you guys meet?
You can
In Yonkers.
Oh yeah.
We were both from Yonkers.
Okay. Now when did you guys meet?
57. Well, our families knew each other.
Oh, okay.
So,
And what was your maiden name?
Watson.
Okay. And what did your dad do and stuff?
He had his own stone company.
And so you grew up there in Yonkers?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And but was he still with Pratt and Whitney when you first
No,
met?
he had just started graduate school at that point.
Okay. And where'd you? So when you got out, you went to.
The Wharton Graduate School down at the University of Pennsylvania
Okay.
in Philadelphia.
All right. And so were you going to school there too, or you just?
No, I was teaching in Yonkers.
Oh, okay. All right. And what was your first date, or how did you do you remember?
Well, yeah, we went to Tappan Hill. I remember that. And then
What's that?
it's a restaurant.
Oh, okay.
And then he took me to the boat yard. That is
The Boat Club.
the boat club,
Oh,
excuse me.
yeah.
And you had to walk down this long, steep driveway and some steps, and it was dark. And I'm thinking, I don't know if I should be down here. But it worked out fine, didn't it?
The perfect gentleman that he was. Yes. And do you have children?
We have 2, a
And what-
boy and a girl,
And what are their names?
Gregory and Carol.
And how old are they?
Greg is 45 and Carol is 43.
You know, where do they live in Connecticut also?
No, our son is in Harvard, Massachusetts, and our daughter is in Des Moines, Iowa. One is a minister and one is a doctor.
Really? Any children? I mean, do you have any grandchildren?
Oh yeah, we have 4 boys.
4 boys.
Each of the children have 2 boys.
Oh, that's nice. You get to see them fairly often?
Mm-hmm. Quite a bit.
So let's kind of pick up now. Did you ever do any flying after you got left Pratt & Whitney?
Well, I went into the consulting business, and for many years I was visiting all of the airframe and engine manufacturers, and whenever I would visit a manufacturer, I would wear my Society of Experimental Test Pilot pin, and it would not be long before the chief test pilot for that company would call me and get in touch with me and offer me the opportunity to fly their newest aircraft. So for really quite a few years, every time I would go and visit some manufacturer, I would get an opportunity to fly their newest aircraft.
Oh.
Something that is a privilege that's offered to members of the SETP. I'm not sure how authorized that is at the higher levels, but in any event, it takes place.
What were some of the aircraft that you flew?
Well, for a while I was doing a lot of work on the business jets, and in fact played a significant role in the development of several of the business jets. So virtually all of the business jets were aircraft that I flew. Some of them more than one time. I did a lot of work for the Canadian government when they were assisting Canadair in the development of what's now called the Challenger executive aircraft, and the Learjets and the DH-125s, etc. were all aircraft I flew, as well as some of the airline aircraft too.
Do you have a favorite?
Aircraft? Well, the F-101 was the fastest aircraft I flew.
How fast?
Well, the original F-101,
And that was called the...
the Voodoo,
Oh.
McDonnell Douglas Voodoo. Well, back in those days it wasn't McDonnell Douglas, it was just McDonnell. And that we tested that was one of the test aircraft that we had when I was with Pratt & Whitney at Edwards. And the early F-100A had a J-57 with just a standard afterburner. And the F-101 with a standard afterburner was roughly a Mach 1.5 aircraft. In other words, you'd fly at 1.5 times the speed of sound. But an engineer at Pratt & Whitney had theorized about and designed and built a supersonic afterburner. All afterburners before that time had been subsonic afterburners. In other words, the speed of the air going through the nozzle of the afterburner was restricted to slightly below the speed of sound.
Can you describe a jet engine? You're talking about afterburners and different things. Can you kind of... What is a jet engine? What makes it up?
The air is brought into the front of a jet engine into a compressor section. And depending upon the design of the engine, there can be from, I don't know, 4 or 5 up to 15 individual stages of compressors. The bigger compressor, or the bigger sized fan blades at the front of the engine, and really pretty small size fan blades at the back of the compressor section. And the fact that the size is getting smaller reflects the fact that each stage of the compressor is compressing the air more, and the more you compress the air, the less volume it needs. So the air comes out of the compressor at very high pressure and relatively high temperature. And then it goes through a burner section where all of the air is mixed with fuel, kerosene or JP4 is what the military called it, which increases the pressure and the temperature a lot more. And then it goes through a turbine, and the turbine section has 3 or 4 stages, which now takes out the energy from this high streaming, fast streaming flow of air. And in all of the engines today, there are what they call a two-spool engine, namely the front several sections or stages of the compressor are linked to the rear couple of stages of the turbine by a shaft, and the middle sections of the second sections of the compressor are linked to the front section of the turbine, again linked by a shaft, where one shaft is inside the other shaft, so that the turbine drives the compressor. Now that's a standard jet engine. With a jet fighter, they usually add just a ring of essentially spray nozzles, where they just inject relatively large amounts of kerosene directly into the airstream, and they ignite it. And
that gives you like an extra burst of speed if you need it.
yeah, it gives you maybe something like a 30% increase in thrust, but it increases the fuel consumption by about 50%. So you only use it if you really need that additional thrust.
Is that what you call afterburner?
And that's the afterburner.
Oh, okay, I got you.
Now at the end of the afterburner is a nozzle, and the nozzle opens up when the afterburner is in operation, to allow this this much more rapidly flowing stream of air to exit the aircraft, but closes up when the afterburner is not in operation. Now it is that nozzle that, by aerodynamic principles, is limited to the speed of sound in the normal configuration. But this engineer, Pratt Whitney, decided, and we all knew, that if you develop something called a convergent divergent nozzle, where the shape of the nozzle is very carefully controlled, that you can obtain supersonic speeds in the nozzle. And the theory was that a supersonic nozzle would greatly increase the amount of thrust from the afterburner. So they hand-made one supersonic afterburner, and they put it on our F-101. And we went from a Mach 1.5 aircraft up to a Mach 1.7 aircraft with one supersonic afterburner. And then they gave us a second supersonic afterburner, and we went up to just about Mach 2. So our F-101 was really the first Mach II fighter, and would have been a lot more than that, except they never changed the inlet to the aircraft. And the inlet had been optimized for the standard J57 engine with a standard afterburner, and had not been optimized for the much more powerful supersonic afterburner. So we weren't
to allow more air to come in?
to allow more air to come in. So we were limited by air intake, not by engine power.
And Mach 2 is how many miles an hour?
Well, the speed of sound varies with temperature. At sea level, at I don't know, standard day, the speed of sound is roughly 750 miles an hour. Up at 40,000 feet, at 30 or 40 below zero, it is in the order of 660 miles an hour, something like that. So Mach 2 would be roughly in the order of 1,250 miles an hour.
Pretty fast.
Yeah, the thought that we were flying 1,200 miles an hour back in the early 1950s, and now it's 50 years later, and aircraft, the fastest of the fighters, are now only flying like Mach 2.2. So we were really beating new frontiers in aviation back in
You sure
the
were.
early 1950s.
Now that German Me-262, we think of it as like the first jet fighter or whatever. Their jet engine, was it similar to the ones that you were working with, or?
I don't think they had an afterburner.
No, probably not.
It was, my recollection is that it was an axial flow jet engine, as contrasted with what is called a centrifugal flow compressor section. I know nothing about the engine. I know very little about the plane, other than seeing the plane at
Right,
the Air and Space Museum in Dayton, Ohio.
So, so you graduated from when did you graduate from college then? From Wharton?
1958.
Okay. And then did you immediately become a consultant, or did you? What did
Yes.
you do after that?
Yeah.
Okay.
And enjoyed consulting activity until I retired 8 or 10 years ago.
Okay. And what have you been doing since you retired?
Well, we're trying to live on Social Security and finding it difficult. So I'm contemplating having my wife go out and get a job, but so far she hasn't cooperated.
She hasn't, yeah. What kind of activities do you guys like to do?
Well, we live on a golf course in Hartford. In fact, at on the site of the golf course that they use for the Greater Hartford Open,
Oh, yeah. What's the name of it?
River Highlands.
Okay.
the TPC golf course for the GHO, which is now called the Buick Open.
Yeah.
We're members of a church in Rocky Hill that is a historic church which is 250 years old and hasn't been repaired or repainted or refurbished for about 200 of those 250 years. So I've organized a team of about a dozen guys, and we are in the process of repainting the church and refurbishing the church. And between
And you go skiing.
a little golf and a lot of work on the church, really it's just children. We visit our
Kids.
son up in Massachusetts once a week, and we go and visit our daughter in Des Moines.
Every couple of months.
Yeah, we go there 3 or 4 times a year, and we
Yeah.
spend 2 or 3 weeks with her each time. So we spend a lot of time with our grandchildren.
How do you know Debbie and Ed?
We met them in the church when we both lived down on Long Island.
They lived in the community right alongside us on Long Island, and we went to the same church.
So when did you live there on Long Island?
We only moved to Connecticut 4 years ago.
Oh, really? Oh.
We were there for over 40 years.
Yeah.
And why did you move there?
Too many people.
Too many people on Long Island.
No. Why did you go to Long Island in the first place?
When you were for your work.
Well, right after I got out of school, I went to work for a small consulting company, a management consulting company that specialized in aviation. And I was with them for 10 years, and then they went out of business. But they were on Long Island, so we moved into that same town. But then I just kept on doing the same thing, working by myself rather than working for that other consulting company.
And is this the first time you've been out here to the desert?
Oh no,
No, we visited the bikes.
No, okay.
A couple of years we came out.
they've been out here 13 years, and I guess we've been out visiting them 5 or 6 times over that 13 years.
Have you played any golf out here at any of the courses?
We've been watching the rain for
It's
the last.
rained
Well, I
ever
know this
since we've
time, but I
been
mean
here.
in the past. Yeah.
A little bit, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it sure is nice having you guys here and chatting. I've learned a lot, and I think anybody watching this tape will learn a lot. And I'm anxious to take a look at your book here too. So, anything else you guys want to say, Debbie? You have anything you want to add?
Did you mention Manhasset?
Oh, on Long Island, we lived in Manhasset.
And that your daughter is the doctor and your son is the minister?
Well, I kind of it could be the other way, I
Yeah, it
suppose,
could
but
be,
I
but-
kind of figured that's what kind of a doctor is she?
OBGYN.
Oh.
But she has given up OB.
Because of medical
I was
malpractice.
just going to say I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah.
And she's married to a
And she has,
surgeon.
and she's married to a surgeon.
Oh, okay.
And they have 2 little boys, so
So,
it's easier to not do OB and be on call constantly.
sure. Yeah. Well, again, thanks a lot for coming.
Oh, thank
Okay.
you.
Pleasure
Very
meeting you.
enjoyed it.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Nice meeting you.